And in more recent times, well, Supergirl apparently briefly fell in with the Britney Spears, Paris Hilton crowd. Looking at this cover might make you wonder if sexism ever reared its head in the portrayal of women in comic books, or if it was always only really about female empowerment. Let's take a look back to the 1960s for a moment and consider this. A vision in black leotards in the days before Spandex, Batgirl became a staple in Batman's comic book and TV adventures. On this 1960s cover, a besieged Batman screams, "Batgirl, get over here, help us, we've got a problem." Batgirl replies, "I have a bigger one, a run in my tights." Contrast that with today's depiction of an in-your-face Catwoman, clad in a black leather outfit that could have been purchased at Wilson's House of Suede and Leather and Bondage. She takes no crap from no man. And note that superhero costumes and identities were not only derived from winged creatures and wild animals, but also from simple domesticated animals, as evidenced by Catwoman, Black Cat, Catman, the Cat, Hellcat, and Wild Dog. And yes, besides superhero comics, there were romance comics with 1940s to 50s sensibilities and the same moral code that kept Lucy and Ricky in separate beds on I Love Lucy. In these comic books, the men were always the ones in control. Along with Archie and Betty and Veronica, and the fashion comic books like Millie the Model and Katie Keene, Fashion Queen, readers back then were also presented with Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, as the star of her very own title. Here was a real opportunity for comic books to move away from catering to an audience comprised largely of pubescent males. In order to tackle the adventures of a female reporter facing danger in order to get the newest, next breaking story for that great metropolitan newspaper, the Daily Planet. So let's see how comics handled Lois Lane and her fashions in the late 1960s and 1970s. Now, some people might consider possibly that this vintage cover is sexist. Others may simply see a girl reporter wearing, God knows what that is she's wearing. I think it's red underoos. She's bound, gagged, and spread eagle, while her super boyfriend quite literally dumps her. Now, don't jump to conclusions. Clearly, this cover must be an aberration. And you can't jump to conclusions about sexism in comics back then. Nor should we assume that every fashion choice back then was a bad one. We have to look at other covers of Lois Lane comics to be sure. Some pictures simply need no comment. Although those hot pants are almost as hideous as that jewelry. And what's with those darts? Clearly, things had to change in comic books. Comics needed to grow up and adapt to changing time and mores, attitudes, and styles. It was time for a revolution, and that came in the form of Stan Lee, who would usher in the Marvel Age of Comics in 1961. Stan Lee would become the co-creator of Marvel's pantheon of superheroes, including the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, Daredevil, the X-Men, and the Silver Surfer. It all began with Fantastic Four #1 in 1961. Notice anything unique about this cover? It features superheroes who are not wearing superhero costumes. Stan was trying to turn the comic book world on its head. He was trying to deconstruct the superhero. No costumes, textured, complex personalities, relationships with teammates that were often based on quarreling. They simply did not get along all the time. They operated in New York City, not some metropolis or Gotham City. They still faced supervillains, but some of their toughest conflicts were internal ones. And how did fans react? Fantastic Four was a smash hit. It struck a chord with older fans and helped comic books become cool on college campuses for the first time. They loved the new level of characterization, the bickering, the soap opera quality of the heroes' private lives. But they refused to accept superheroes without costumes. No way. A cry rang out, and Marvel nearly faced a counter-revolution. By the third issue, the Fantastic Four all had costumes. Lesson learned. Hardly the candidate for Project Runway, the Incredible Hulk lacked a clothes sense. But then again, he certainly made a bold fashion statement with his ripped purple pants. A modern-day version of the legendary golem of Eastern European Jewish folklore, for years no one could actually explain just how the pants worn by 98-pound weakling Dr. Bruce Banner managed to expand sufficiently to cover the essentials of that Incredible Hulk. A real flip on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Armor became the hot superhero costuming trend of 1962 with the debut of Tony Stark, Iron Man. Originally gray, ponderous, and clunky, this modern-day knight in shining armor was most influenced by the look of robots in decades of science fiction pulps and movie serials. Tony must have hired fashion consultants for a complete makeover, as he soon went high-tech and designed a leaner, meaner suit of armor, sleek and in hot colors. These days, he seems to change his look often. With his newfound success in movies this summer, expect this trend to continue. You've seen comic book superheroes whose code names and costumes are based on winged creatures, wild animals, and domesticated animals. So now let's add insects to that list. It's a concept sure to challenge the best clothing designers. The list is endless. Ant-Man, the Fly, Ambush Bug, Green Hornet, Blue Beetle, the Wasp, Bee-Man, Firefly, the Scorpion, Tarantula, and even the Tick. But none ever achieved the success of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. In the very first Spider-Man comic book story, Stan Lee confessed an industry secret about costuming to all his readers. He said, quote, "Like costume heroes? Confidentially, we in the comic mag business refer to them as long underwear characters," unquote. Peter Parker's red and blue long underwear, embroidered with spider's webbing, was brilliant in its simplicity, and his one-way eye coverings, which let him see out without letting anyone see in, would influence a generation of sunglasses. This was one cool costume, which was suddenly abandoned one day in favor of an all-black uniform made out of a living alien symbiote, which biologically encased the web-slinger in a new black superhero chic. It later separated from Spidey and turned on him, as you can see, with deadly force.